13. Socrates, the Philosopher of Questions. In the history of Western philosophy, Socrates is the decisive figure who shifted the paradigm of thought, from nature to human beings and human life. Among the countless expressions that describe him, the proposition, Socrates is the philosopher of questions, is the sentence that most accurately pierces his life, methodology, and philosophical orientation. However, for Socrates, questions were not mere intellectual curiosity or tools of debate meant to embarrass others. His questions were always directly linked to highly ethical and existential issues. How should one live as a human being? That is, how can one realize arete virtue? This essay provides an in-depth analysis and explanation of the philosophy of questions practiced by Socrates, focusing on its deep connection with the ancient Greek traditional concept of arete virtue. Number 1. The conceptual shift of arete, from external excellence to excellence of the soul. Before Socrates, in the Greek society of the Homeric era, arete was commonly translated as excellence or virtue, but it mainly referred to external and result-oriented elements, such as valor on the battlefield, physical strength, noble birth, political power, and wealth. In other words, superior abilities, recognized by others, or physical and social superiority constituted arete. Socrates completely dismantled and redefined this concept of arete. Limits of external conditions. Wealth, fame, power, and physical beauty do not in themselves make a human truly excellent. Care of the soul, therapeia tes psyches, true arete, according to Socrates, is not a condition given from the outside, but the state in which the human soul has reached its highest pinnacle, that is, the excellence of the soul. How then can one cultivate the soul to its best state and reach true arete? Socrates declared that the unexamined life is not worth living, presenting constant self-examination and questioning as the sole path to cultivating the soul. Questioning becomes an essential means to heal the afflictions of the soul and advance toward arete. 2. The unity of knowledge and virtue, episteme and arete, and the necessity of questioning. One of the core propositions of Socratic ethics is the doctrine of the unity of knowledge and virtue, stating that virtue is knowledge, arete is episteme. Number 1. The relationship between ignorance and evil. Socrates identified the cause of humans committing evil or living wrongly, not as a lack of will, but as ignorance. Every human instinctively pursues what is good for themselves. However, because they do not know what is truly good, they mistake temporary pleasures or empty fame for true goodness, thereby committing wrong actions. Therefore, to practice virtues arete, such as justice, courage, temperance, and piety, true knowledge, episteme about what is truly just and courageous must come first. 2. The pursuit of knowledge through questioning. Here lies the crucial role of questions. Most of the knowledge we possess consists of nothing more than social customs, indoctrination by others, or uncritical prejudices, doxa. Unless it is true knowledge gained through one's own realization, it cannot lead to arete that transforms life. By asking fundamental questions such as, what is justice? What is courage? And, can virtue be taught? Socrates probes the existing conventional wisdom, hidden under the guise of common sense. Questioning removes bubble-like false knowledge and serves as the intrinsic driving force, leading the soul to true truth, episteme. Number 3. The mechanism of questioning. Maieutic, aporia, and consciousness of ignorance. Socrates' philosophy of questioning is put into practice through his famous Socratic method, elenchos and midwifery maieutique. This methodology is a step-by-step process for realizing virtue. Habit 1. Consciousness of ignorance through examination. and refutation, elenchos. Socrates claimed that he was not a teacher who taught anything himself. He would ask his conversation partner for the definition of a specific concept, piety, justice, and expose the contradictions and errors hidden within the answers through a series of questions. In this process, the partner comes to realize that, regarding what they thought they knew well, they actually knew nothing at all. This is called the consciousness of ignorance. The ethical value of aporia, the state of confusion and deadlock reached upon. Realizing one's ignorance is called aporia. Aporia is not mere intellectual frustration, but a moment of ethical purification, catharsis, where the pursuit of virtue, arete, finally begins. This is because only when arrogant intellectual overconfidence is let go does space open up to contemplate genuine knowledge and virtue. Habit 3. Spiritual midwifery, maieutique. Likening himself to his mother's profession, Socrates called himself a midwife of the soul, just as a midwife does not give birth to a child herself, but helps the mother give birth. Socrates used questions to guide his interlocutors to give birth on their own to the true truth and virtue sleeping within their souls. Virtue is not knowledge injected from the outside, but a fruit that awakens within the soul through constant questioning and reflection. Number 4. Sophists' eloquence versus Socrates' questions, comparing perspectives on virtue. Examining the conflict between the Sophists, who dominated Athens at the time, and Socrates makes the uniqueness of Socrates' arete as a philosopher of questions even clearer. For the Sophists, virtue was a technique for obtaining power by persuading others on the political stage or in court. Thus, their tool was one-sided eloquent speech, designed to captivate others. On the other hand, for Socrates, arete was the honesty of the soul and an attitude toward truth, a one-sided declaration eloquence, aimed at defeating an opponent cannot lead them to truth. Only through an interactive, collaborative inquiry of question and answer can each person's soul realize its own ignorance and reach arete. Number 5. Conclusion. A life of questioning and the completion of arete. Ultimately, the proposition Socrates is the philosopher of questions goes beyond the formal, meaning that he merely enjoyed using questions as a conversational technique. For Socrates, questioning was the only practical way of life to complete true humanity, arete. Even when willingly facing a death sentence, Socrates declared to the citizens of Athens that he would not stop asking questions. Comparing himself to a gadfly sent by God to awaken Athens, a lazy horse, he constantly posed questions to prevent the citizens' souls from falling into complacency. To him, questioning signified the following. 1. A tool of awareness that shatters ignorance. 2. Ethical purification that pares away the impurities of the soul. 3. The driving force toward true knowledge. 4. The path to finally completing true human virtue, arete. The real reason we call Socrates the philosopher of questions is that the questions he posed were ultimately acupuncture for the soul, enabling humans to establish the arete of their own souls and live the best possible life. At the turning point of Western intellectual history, the deepest track left by Socrates lies in bringing philosophy down from the physics of the heavens to the anthropology of the earth, shaping life directly through the modality of questions. The proposition, Socrates is the philosopher of questions, transcends a mere intellectual technique he used. It demonstrates an ethical and philosophical essence, finalized within the context of maieutike, a unique labor process for producing truth, and his practical dialogues with the Athenian youth of his day. The multi-layered meaning of Socrates' questions is explained through the combination of his internal methodology of midwifery and his external historical practice of dialogue with the youth. 1. Maieutique, the mechanism of questioning that gives birth to truth. Socrates defined himself not as a teacher who indoctrinates knowledge, but as a midwife of the soul, who brings out the truth already latent within the interlocutor's soul. Drawing from the fact that his mother, arete, was an actual midwife, this metaphor captures the full originality of Socrates' philosophy of questioning. 1. Emptying and pregnancy. The labor pains of conscious ignorance. Just as a midwife cannot give birth to a child on behalf of the mother, Socrates believed he could not directly plant dogma into another's soul. True knowledge cannot be delivered unilaterally from the outside. It must awaken from within the soul itself. Deconstruction of conventional wisdom. The first step of midwifery is to probe the crude prejudices or common sense doxa, held by the other person through questions. Labor pains of aporia. Subjected to Socrates' continuous questioning elenchos, the interlocutor experiences aporia, an impasse and confusion where the notions they thought they knew well break down. This confusion is not intellectual frustration, but an essential mental labor pain, necessary to strip away arrogance and conceive true knowledge anew. 2. Delivery and verification. Testing the soul's offspring. The second step of midwifery is refining through questions, the thought definition of a concept brought forth by the speaker. Just as a midwife rigorously checks whether a newborn child is healthy or merely a phantom, Socrates puts the answer provided by the interlocutor back onto the testing ground elenchos of questions. Through this, vain delusions or deceptive knowledge are weeded out, leaving only true wisdom that endures, rational reason, and logical consistency as the fruit of the soul. 2. Dialogues with Athenian youth. Why the youth and why the agora? Socrates' questions were not posed in secluded rooms or closed classrooms of an academy, but in the agora square and gymnasium of Athens, directed toward the youth. This was deeply intertwined with the political and cultural crisis of Athens at the time. 1. An ethical counterattack against sophistic education. Athens, around the time of the Peloponnesian War, was in an era of decline and turmoil. The youth of that era paid money to Sophists to learn oratory and rhetoric for the sake of career advancement and political success. The education of the Sophists was skill-oriented, focused on how to persuade others to win, and pursued relativistic utility rather than universal truth. Socrates saw this trend as devastating the souls of the youth and bringing about the moral corruption of Athens. While Sophists fascinated the youth with one-sided speeches, eloquence, Socrates awakened their thinking with short, continuous questions. He impressed upon the youth that honesty of the soul is more important than political victory, and that the question, how to live a truly excellent life, takes precedence over worldly success. 2. An intellectual stimulant, training autonomous thought. To the Athenian youth, uncritically exposed to the customs of the older generation, or the sweet talk of politicians, Socrates' questions were a radical stimulus that awakened them from habitual intellectual laziness. The numerous young men appearing in Plato's dialogues, such as Theaetetus, Glaucon, and Meno, transformed through Q&A sessions, with Socrates from passive beings, receiving answers given by others into autonomous thinkers, who explore and judge truth on their own. 3. The threefold structure of the philosophy of questioning, encompassing both midwifery and dialogues with the youth. The philosophy of questioning, practiced by Socrates, can be analyzed through the following threefold structure. 1. Critical and deconstructive questions. Function to dismantle knowledge, trapped in existing customs, authority, and vain reputation, thereby eliciting the awareness of ignorance. 2. Constructive and midwife-like questions. Function to stimulate the interlocutor's reason, guiding them to derive universal definitions regarding justice, courage, and virtue on their own. 3. Practical and existential questions. function as an ethical decision that does not remain mere intellectual play, but compels one to directly examine one's life and cultivate the soul. 4. Conclusion. The spike in the soul that awakened the youth. The legacy of questions. Ultimately, the proposition, Socrates is the philosopher of questions, means that he did not leave behind a finished dogma or philosophical system as a legacy, but rather the way of life that questions itself. He saw himself as a gadfly sent by God to wake up the lazy horse of Athens. By constantly piercing the souls of the youth with the spike of questions, he enabled them to break free from an uncritical life, think for themselves, and upright their souls. To Socrates, questioning, as midwifery was, the soul's delivery technique that brings forth inner truth and dialogue with the youth, was an intellectual and ethical struggle to rescue the souls of the next generation from inertia. Even today, 2,500 years later, Socrates' questions continue to pose the exact same query to us. Are you yourself examining your life right now? Theaetetus. Plato's dialogue Theaetetus is a unique work among the Socratic dialogues that persistently investigates a single, epistemological question from start to finish. What is knowledge? The questions posed by Socrates in this dialogue go beyond simple conceptual definitions, demonstrating the most famous, self-conscious declaration of maieutike midwifery in the history of philosophy, as well as the highest level of intellectual purification, catharsis that strips away the arrogance of the soul through the consciousness of ignorance. Socrates' questions in Theaetetus can be deeply analyzed. By dividing them into the declaration of midwifery, the questions posed to the three definitions of knowledge, and the ethical epistemological significance of aporia. Number 1. Self-conscious declaration of midwifery maieutique. The identity of the questioner. In the early part of Book 1 of Theaetetus, Socrates confesses through the famous metaphor of the midwife why he constantly only asks questions and never provides answers himself. Number 1. The questioner, diagnosing the soul. Socrates mentions that his mother, arete, was a midwife, and states that he himself performs the work of a midwife. The only difference is that the subject he deals with is not the female body, but the souls of young men. Determining pregnancy. Just as a midwife determines whether a mother is pregnant, Socrates uses questions to diagnose whether a young man's soul holds any valuable thoughts, whether it is in a state of intellectual pregnancy. Inducing labor. Pain's questions serve to induce intellectual labor pains, aporia, so that thoughts sleeping within the interlocutor's inner self can burst forth. 2. Distinguishing phantoms, wind eggs from true offspring. The most vital function of questioning as midwifery is verification. Socrates describes himself as being in a barren state, producing nothing in terms of wisdom. Because he is not a teacher possessing wisdom, he uses pure questioning to thoroughly put on trial elenchos, whether the concept, delivered by the interlocutor, is true knowledge, possessing genuine vitality, or a phantom wind egg, consisting of mere vain delusions. Here is the English translation of the provided text. Number 2. Socrates' questions, posed to the three definitions of knowledge, episteme. The pure-hearted youth Theaetetus, who is gifted in mathematics, answers Socrates' midwife-like questions, and sequentially gives birth to three definitions of knowledge. Socrates examines the limits of each definition through sophisticated counter-questions. First question. Is knowledge perception aesthesis? When Theaetetus first answers, knowledge is simply perception, as felt through our eyes or ears, Socrates connects this definition with Protagoras' relativism. Man is the measure of all things, and Heraclitus' theory of universal flux. Everything flows, panta re, posing the following questions. If a wind blows and one person feels cold, while another does not? Is the wind itself cold or not cold? If everything changes and comes into being without a moment's rest, how can expressions like seeing or knowing hold any fixed meaning? Can perceptions felt while dreaming or during mental illness also be called true knowledge? Philosophical outcome of the question. Socrates' questions expose that perception depends solely on an individual's variable and subjective state. When seeing colors with eyes and hearing sounds with ears, the subject that compares and integrates color and sound to judge this exists or this is different from that is not the sensory organ, but the soul itself. Therefore, he leads to the conclusion that knowledge must reside, not in perception, but in the soul's thought and judgment beyond perception. Second question. Is knowledge true judgment? Alethes doxa? Realizing the limits of perception, Theaetetus revises his answer. Knowledge is the true judgment conviction the soul makes about things. In response, Socrates asks a counter-question regarding the possibility of false judgment, false belief. If we know something, we already know it. If we do not know it, we do not know it. How can false judgment arise, wherein one mistakes what they know for what they do not, or what they do not know for what they do? To solve this problem, Socrates presents two famous metaphors and questions his interlocutor. 1. The metaphor of the wax tablet. Suppose there is a wax tablet in our mind, where memories are stamped like seals. Is misidentifying someone approaching from afar, due to a mismatch between the impression on the wax and actual perception. 2. The metaphor of the aviary. Suppose we place various kinds of knowledge, birds inside an aviary called the mind. Is it possible that while trying to catch a bird of knowledge, I accidentally catch a bird of ignorance? Philosophical outcome of the question. Through continuous questioning, Socrates points out the contradiction that defining knowledge, merely as true judgment, fails to distinguish genuine knowledge. Episteme, from plausible opinion. Doxa, hit upon by chance. Just because a judge accidentally delivers a correct verdict, based solely on circumstantial evidence, does not mean the judge fully knows the truth of the case. Third question. Is knowledge true? Judgment with an account logos? Finally, Theaetetus proposes a sophisticated definition, widely accepted at the time. Knowledge is true judgment, combined with rational account logos, or justification. Here, Socrates poses a fundamental question, probing the meaning of the word account logos. What is account logos as spoken of here? Is it merely expressing in language, analyzing by breaking down into elements, or providing a unique mark difference that distinguishes it from others? 1. If it simply means expressing in words, language, it is meaningless, because every true judgment would become knowledge the moment it is spoken. 2. If it means analyzing into constituent elements, does knowing the whole mean knowing the set of elements? While a composite can be known, the primary, primitive element forming that composite can no longer be explained. How can a whole made of unexplainable elements become knowledge? 3. If it means knowing the unique difference, the very fact that I am already making a true judgment about an object means I have already grasped its unique difference. Adding an account that knows the difference would be nothing more than a tautology, adding knowing to what is known. Number 3. Conclusion. The final fruit left by questioning as midwifery. In the end, Theaetetus ends in aporia deadlock without reaching a clear, positive definition of what knowledge is. However, Socrates' questioning in this dialogue by no means fail. Rather, questioning as midwifery achieves the greatest philosophical fruit. Toward the very end of the dialogue, Socrates says to the young Theaetetus, "If you ever conceive other thoughts in the future, You will be pregnant with better ones, thanks to today's examination. And even if you remain empty, you will be much less burdensome and gentler to your companions, by not thinking you know what you do not know. Socrates' questions in Theaetetus bring forth the following genuine fruits. 1. Purging of false knowledge. Slashing away pretensions and phantom-like concepts that one mistook for knowledge, through the blade of questioning, thereby purifying the soul. 2. Consciousness of ignorance. Socratic ignorance, proving the genuine inquiry into knowledge begins with clearly realizing what one does not know. 3. Virtue arete and humility of the soul, establishing a philosophical attitude of genuinely pursuing wisdom toward others and the world, by casting off arrogance and becoming intellectually humble. Ultimately, Socrates' questioning in Theaetetus was not a question meant to inject a perfect answer, but the essence of intellectual midwifery, continuously deconstructing false answers, so the soul could breathe toward truth on its own. Socrates' questions in Plato's major dialogues, Apology. Apologia, Republic, Politeia, Symposium, Symposion, and Phaedrus. Phaedrus take on different characteristics and orientations, according to the core theme each work addresses, while sharing one overriding purpose: the purification of the human soul and ascension toward truth. Eros. The following is an in-depth analysis and explanation of Socrates' questions across these 4 dialogues, according to textual context and philosophical character. Number 1. Apology. Apologia. Existential and ethical questions under condemnation and in court. In Apology, Socrates' questions unfold in the dramatic space of a courtroom, where he faces the death penalty. Here, questioning takes on the character of an existential verification and ethical urge that exposes the arrogance of his interlocutors. Number 1. Questions exposing ignorance. Dialogue with Miletus. Socrates poses his signature refutational dialogue, elenchos, against Miletus, his chief accuser. When asked, who makes the youth good, Miletus answers, the laws, the judges, and all the citizens. Socrates refutes this just as only 1 or 2 horse-training experts improve horses, while the general public ruins them. Youth education also requires expert knowledge. How can everyone possibly make the youth good? This question exposes before the public that Miletus, the accuser, is in a state of conscious ignorance, having never once seriously pondered the very education and virtue of youth. He accused Socrates of corrupting. Number 2. Existential questions directed at all citizens of Athens. In his courtroom defense, Socrates expands his questions beyond individual accusers to all Athenian citizens. Why do you care so much about money, fame, and success, yet do not care for or ponder your own soul, wisdom, and truth? Regardless of winning or losing the trial, this is a question as a gadfly awakening, the moral paralysis of all Athenian society, which was steeped in inertia and pursuing only external conditions. To Socrates, questioning was not a means to beg for his life, but an existential ethical act, urging others to cultivate their souls, even in the face of death. Number 2. Republic Politeia. Deconstruction of conventional ideas and questions toward universal justice, dikaiosune. Starting in Book 1 of Republic, Socrates' questions serve as constructive and systematic queries that dissect the vested view of justice held by existing society and establish a universal, rational concept of justice. 1 questions shattering the notion that justice is the interest of the strong, confrontation with Thrasymachus. The sophist, Thrasymachus, argues for a dominant, realistic view of justice. Justice is the interest of the stronger. Socrates poses sophisticated counter-questions to this. If a ruler makes a mistake and creates a law that is harmful to himself, is it to the advantage or disadvantage of the stronger for the subjects to follow that law? Just as a doctor exists for the health of the patient and a captain for the safety of the crew does not. The true art of ruling exists for the interest of the ruled, rather than the ruler himself. These questions logically dismantle the relativistic view of justice that attempts to dress up the power of vested interests as justice, reminding us that the essence of craft, technique, and ruling lies in benefiting the subject. 2 questions establishing the education of guardians and the state system. From the middle of Republic onward, Socrates' questions fueled by the query, what is justice in the individual and in the state? Serve to design the structure of the ideal state Callipolis, the long process of inquiry that elicits the tripartite soul, reason, spirit, appetite, the 3 corresponding classes of the state, and the necessity of the philosopher king, is built entirely along the trajectory of questions posed by Socrates. Number 3. Symposium. Symposion. Questions of eros, sublimating desire into truth. In Symposium, Socrates' questions go beyond conventional praise of beauty and love. They are questions of midwife-like sublimation that elevate human inner desire into divine truth. Number 1. Questions asking the essence of eros. Dialogue with Agathon. When the tragic poet Agathon praises eros as the most beautiful and excellent god, Socrates strips away that flashy rhetoric through questions. Is eros love for something or not? It is love for something. Then does eros desire what it already has or what it lacks? Agathon. It desires what it lacks. If eros desires beauty, does eros itself possess beauty or lack it? Through just a few questions, Socrates leads Agathon himself to realize that eros is not a perfect god, but a deficient state positioned between lack and fullness, an intermediary. Diamond advancing toward truth. 2 questions climbing the ladder of beauty. Teachings of Diotima. Recalling his past Q&A experience with Diotima, the priestess of Mantinea, Socrates presents the ultimate orientation of eros. The ascending ladder starting from the desire for physical beauty, passing through the beauty of souls, institutions, and sciences, finally reaching unchanging beauty itself. Idea is made possible through the energy of constantly, asking, what is truly beautiful? Number 4. Phaedrus. Phaedrus, critique of rhetoric, and questions of true dialogue guiding the soul. In Phaedrus, Socrates' questions criticize the limits of written text records and sophistic rhetoric, reaffirming the value of vivid, soul-to-soul questioning. Number 1. Limits of the written word and superiority of living dialogue questions. Through the myth of King Thamus and the god Thuth, Socrates poses questions, pointing out the dangers of written text. Does not writing fail to answer the questioner, merely repeating the same words over and over? Written text does not impart true wisdom to the soul. It merely provides illusions of pretending to remember and external knowledge. Conversely, Socrates' living questions and dialogue flexibly react to the state of the interlocutor's soul, becoming true seeds planted directly within the soul. 2. Questioning as psychagogy, psychagopia. Socrates argues that true rhetoric should not be a persuasive technique to deceive others, but the art of guiding the soul toward truth. Psychagopia. In a one-on-one dialogue with the young Phaedrus, Socrates unlocks the essence of the soul, the allegory of the charioteer and 2 winged horses through questions, personally demonstrating an exemplary model of questioning that awakens thought tailored to the level of the interlocutor's soul. Number 5. Conclusion. Map of Socratic questioning across the 4 dialogues. Socrates' questions across the 4 works form the following intellectual, and ethical landscape. Ultimately, if the questions in apology represent a process of purification, sloughing off false knowledge, the questions in Republic represent a process of construction, erecting true wisdom, while the questions in Symposium and Phaedrus represent processes of ascension and guidance leading the soul to transcendent truth. Socrates' questions in Plato's dialogues do not remain mere classical techniques of an ancient philosopher. To humans of every era, accustomed to being injected with finished answers, they serve as the most powerful acupuncture for the soul, compelling one to examine the state of one's own soul and begin thinking toward truth.